Looks like the advent of the 10th edition rulebook must be coming kind of soon, as now we're finally starting to get leaks that Games Workshop haven't told us. Most of the core stratagems from the big rulebook revealed. Your infantry can now go to ground to gain some defense, you can countercharge your enemy with a new and revamped heroic intervention, and plenty more besides. Let's go through the list. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Warhammer 40k 10th edition, and it's quite fun to be talking about some of the first leaks that are coming out from the core book. One of the biggest areas that Games Workshop haven't properly shown off yet is their list of core stratagems from the book. Maybe we'll get some sort of info on it soon, although over the course of a fair few of their other previews we've got some pretty decent ideas, plus from things like keywords and the Warhammer Fest previews. GW confirmed that their list had been expanded a bit from 9th to 10th, bringing in a few more core mechanics that certain armies might have access to, and then just giving them to everyone in general. This list will be one that every army in the game has access to. Currently we've got a list of 7 of the core stratagems, some of them a lot more used than others. We've got the trusty trio of command reroll, counter-offensive and insane bravery, those left over from 8th. Overwatch became a stratagem in 9th edition, and now it's vastly expanded in 10th, and otherwise we had Cut Them Down, Emergency Disembarkation and Desperate Breakout, all ones which were kind of rarely used. In various previews, Games Workshop had confirmed that the list had been expanded to either 11 or 12 depending on where they'd set it. We didn't really have that many details, but now the full list has been leaked, it would seem. An absolutely massive thank you to the person who made me aware of these. Apparently these have been leaked to Discord somewhere, though I'm not entirely sure of the server they first got posted to. The leak itself appears to be a picture one of actual physical photos of a 10th edition rulebook. I'd guess Games Workshop might be having some for playtesting, or they might have sent some out to some content creators, or even just other people who might have got their hands on the book from a warehouse or something. I am pretty certain that these are going to be legitimate. They do fit perfectly with all Games Workshop's previews and the stratagems I was expecting to see, and they are backed up by the images of the actual stratagems, which definitely lends a whole load more credibility, all done in the 10th edition styling, and again the wording is pretty much as we suspected from other previews. I have been asked not to share any images or anything just so we don't get people in trouble here, so we can still talk through all the information that we know. Obviously they're not 100% officially confirmed yet, but I fully believe that these will turn out to be accurate. In any case, getting into the actual details, and here's the leaked list of 10th edition core stratagems. Interestingly, it's a bit of a partial leak. We've only seen the full text for 4 more of them. A few of the others are fairly tried and tested ones that I wouldn't have expected to change that much, and we've got a couple of hints as to 2 more of them. Going through the list, we've got Fire Overwatch, which was previewed at Warhammer Fest, so we knew that was coming. Basically that does seem to work as previewed, doing some reactive shooting on 6s against units within 24 inches, and not just locked to the charge phase. There's one called Go to Ground, which we hadn't heard of yet, infantry jumping down to take cover, and a bit of a throwback to 5th edition. Rapid Ingress, the one that we'd seen from Games Workshop, arriving from reserve in your opponent's turn. Grenade, one that we'd seen previewed on keywords, and I think it was confirmed that this was going to be a stratagem by Games Workshop, but they hadn't told us yet. Smokescreen, again one that had keywords on units. The smoke keyword on vehicles allow you to access this, and it actually does look rather good. Command reroll, counter-offensive and insane bravery, all confirmed to still be a thing. A new and revamped version of heroic intervention, which is now a bit more of a countercharge mechanic and not just locked to characters. And then 2 more that we don't have the full text for, called Epic Challenge and Tank Shock. Neither of those have been really teased by Games Workshop yet. There's some very tiny hints, but I've not seen the full text myself yet. My guess is that the reason that Games Workshop have been varying between saying 12 and 11 of these might be that new tactical mission one that we saw in the mission deck objectives. I guess if you're playing tactical objectives, then you'd have the chance to redraw one once per game, and we'd already had that one previewed. Let's go through the list in that order then, and first up we have Fire Overwatch, definitely one that's had a massive change. We basically had the majority of this confirmed by Games Workshop's previews at Warhammer Fest and people's reports from there. They weren't really using stratagems in that demo, but they were letting people do this. The idea of Fire Overwatch is that it now happens either in your opponent's movement or in their charge phase, and it's perhaps even more flexible than I'd realised it would be. You get to trigger it either at the start or the end of any opponent move, at the start or the end of any opponent charge, and even as a sort of intercept stratagem targeting enemy units that just came in from reserve. As reported by people playing from Warhammer Fest, you are allowed to target enemy units within 24 inches, provided your guns were in range of course, and it basically means that the opponent's not going to be able to approach your army with maximal certainty. It does seem that there's no real restrictions as to what units can shoot. You could do this with a massive great Titanic Super Heavy, or you could do it with an aircraft as best I could tell. And it does have the usual Overwatch rider, basically your attacks will hit on 6s regardless of any modifiers or other rules. but still this could add up to a whole ton of damage from the right units. Overwatch looks like it's going to be super powerful on any enormous Titanic units with a whole cluster of guns. Things like a Baneblade are still going to be very scary even if they're just hitting on 6s, and they could certainly take some big chunks out of lighter units, if not even heavy ones. It's also going to be awesome on anything that auto hits. Maybe things like those new Primaris and Furnace Marines will quite enjoy this. Maybe again they're going to be a bit more brutal when the enemy's actually charging them, but now if the enemy just moves close as well, they can make it barbecue time. Overall, it does look pretty powerful and looks like it could be a good use of one precious CP. I feel like the best use is usually going to be to just target and eliminate a unit that's got some very light defense but some very powerful offense. Maybe units like a Genestealer Colton unit just keying up for a charge, or perhaps some Eldar Aspect warriors that are about to unload some powerful weapons. I feel like even hitting on 6s, you'd have a reasonable chance of killing some valuable models before they get to do their damage, and that could be a pretty big swing. Overall, I would guess that Overwatch is probably going to be used just as much, if not more now. There do seem to be quite a few ways to get some free stratagems on units, as we've seen from the previews, and I guess anything with that fairly common lethal hits rule now, that'll also love Overwatch a lot. You can only do it once per turn though, so you're not going to be able to do it on a massive unit both in the shooting phase and the charge phase, and basically just turning on the damage hose all turn long. Next up, we've got a reactive defensive buff for infantry called Go to Ground. This one's 1 CP, and it feels like it's got a very similar sort of feel to the 5th edition rule where you basically got to get cover with your units. You can use this when an infantry unit is targeted by enemy guns, and you get 2 different defensive buffs, the benefit of cover for a +1 to your saves, and also a 6+ invul. I bear in mind that the benefit of cover isn't going to work on 3+ save units, so it's not going to be good for your standard Space Marines, but seems like it's fairly solid on units with either a 4+ or a 2+ save. The 6+ invul maybe isn't super exciting I think, but I guess it's alright on units that have a terrible save already, and it means that the stratagem at least has some power against enemies shooting with some high AP. Overall, I feel like the most useful thing is probably going to be 2+ save units, unless there's anything in the core rules that prevents them from getting their save boosted, or just any unit that you absolutely need to survive, and you think that this stratagem might make the difference. I feel like maybe in terms of rule durability added, it's a bit weaker than some of the others perhaps, but still an interesting enough option that I think will get used. Could be nice on something like a big durable block of Necron warriors with those reanimation protocols to make them harder to wipe the entire unit. Next up, we've got Rapid Ingress as previewed by Warhammer Community. 1 command point to arrive your reinforcements in the enemy turn. I did do an entire video on this one if you want to check it out sometime, but the quick version takeaway is that I think it's usually a bad idea if your unit is just going to turn up and get shot, but it does have 2 really powerful ways of using it. First up, if you've got a deep strike melee unit that you want to get into combat, you could set it up just 12 inches away from the enemy, provided they can't remove it with guns. You wouldn't be able to get charged at that distance, and then in your turn you can move and charge into the enemy, basically a guaranteed charge if you've got a good move range. You could also use it to drop behind terrain so your unit is safe from enemy shooting, and then spring out to catch them in combat next turn. Otherwise, it could just be useful to score some points earlier, maybe put down a big durable unit on an objective that you think your unit is going to get gunned off. If it means that you hold that point rather than lose that point, extra victory points are going to be great. Looks like an interesting one, and against the right army, I feel like bringing in some dangerous melee units could be very scary with this. Next up, we've got a grenade stratagem, and this is one of the ones that we don't have full text for yet. Good to know that it does sound like you will indeed get this as a stratagem, as I'd suspected from the unit keywords, and I feel like Games Workshop mentioned that it will be at some stage, though I'm not 100% sure where. Looks like the units that would normally have frag and crack grenades on their profile now just get the grenade keyword instead. My guess is that it will give you the chance to do some big damage up close with those units, and I wouldn't be too surprised if there's some sort of option to flex the damage out depending on whether you're attacking a monster or vehicle or infantry to represent either frag or crack. I feel like if I were designing the stratagem, I'd have something that hands out a number of mortal wounds to vehicles, maybe something like 2d3 or d3+1 perhaps, and then to represent frag grenades you could have one that proxies off unit size, maybe one of those rules where you get a mortal wound per every unit in the squad on the roll of a 6. Wouldn't be too surprised if we see something kinda like that. I guess we'll wait and see for that one though. Next up, we've got Smokescreen, which kind of feels like the equivalent of Go to Ground but for vehicles with the smoke keyword. We've seen this on quite a few vehicles previewed already, things like the Land Raider and the Rhino. I'd guess that we'd probably see it on certain other units that are famous for using smoke bombs and things as well, maybe units like infiltrators, incursors, and perhaps others like Orky commandos. I was thinking that if it just remains the -1 to hit that it was currently, it might be a bit on the underpowered side for 1 CP in 10th. It does seem though that it's got a glow up, and it looks a bit better than the Go to Ground one in my opinion. Like Go to Ground, it gives you 2 different defensive buffs. First up, it counts you as having the benefit of cover for a +1 to your save, though again I guess that could be kind of limited use on certain vehicles, again with that rule that you can't get 3+ vehicles going to a 2+ save, as with the benefit of cover rule. That rule definitely does have me a bit suspicious that it still might not affect 2+ save units. I feel like it would be kind of weird to ban the 3+ save ones but not the 2+ ones. I guess we'll wait and see just how powerful that is. If so, it could be great on 2+ save vehicles, but otherwise it's going to be completely meaningless on anything with better than a 4+ save. The other special rule is that it gives you the stealth special rule, which unfortunately is still not confirmed by Games Workshop, despite us having seen it in multiple different units now. As before, I'm still strongly guessing that this is probably going to be a -1 to hit at range only, as it seems not to be the benefit of cover, and I suspect if it was a feel no pain or something, then they'd probably just call it that. I guess it might have a minimum distance requirement for it to take effect, maybe something like greater than 6 inches or greater than 12 inches away from the target. That was the way for things like Alpha Legion and Raven Guard in 9th. Overall though, I guess it's still usable. Looks like it's particularly good as a defensive buff if you can access both parts. Against a 3+ to hit unit, against a 4+ save vehicle, I suppose you could often be getting a 60% durability buff or better, so that's be quite good there. Otherwise though, if it's just the -1 to hit, I guess it could be particularly nice if you're being targeted by something ballistic skill 4+, as it basically equates to a +50% durability increase against that. Overall seems useful enough though. I feel like it probably will see play, even though I think it might not be one of the very strongest stratagems that you can use. Next up we've got 3 core stratagems, and unfortunately it seems no further details on this just now. The command reroll, counter-offensive, and insane bravery. I suppose until proven otherwise, we'll guess that these are probably just staying the same. They've already had the chance to polish them once between 8th edition and 9th edition, in which they did make some changes. I guess for the command reroll, the biggest questions might be what sort of rolls it can affect. It might be less or more restrictive than before. For counter-offensive, I kind of wonder whether it's still going to be 2 CP or just 1. On the core mechanics it looks like there's going to be fewer CP flying around, though certain characters do seem to generate them fairly easily. Lastly there's insane bravery, which again might be either 1 or 2 CP, probably just auto-pass a battle shock test, and I'd guess that like before this will probably be limited to just once per battle. It currently is that way at the moment, and I'd kind of be surprised with so much emphasis on battle shock that you'd just be able to nullify it all game long for a few CP. I'd guess it probably will retain the once per game thing. Next up, and perhaps one of the most interesting changes on the list that we've seen the full text for, is Heroic Intervention. I was kind of intrigued to see this crop up on the list, as I did suspect it would be completely gone from the game to be honest, given all the character changes. Now most characters are going to be leading units, it just seemed like there wasn't going to be as much use for this. It does seem though that it returns as a big expensive 2 CP stratagem, though in the right situation this looks absolutely devastating and could really make a big swing to a game. Basically this is a countercharge type mechanic in a similar sort of way as the Custodes Virtus Praetors had, or the Salamander's countercharge thing, and the way it works is this. First up, your opponent charges one of your units, you then select one of your friendly units that's within 6 inches of the enemy unit that just completed that charge, and then you get to make a charge of your own against them. So say for example, if some Space Marines charged your unit of Tyranid Termagants, and then you had a big scary Carnifex nearby, you could then get the Carnifex involved in the combat, and hopefully give those Marines a nasty and fatal surprise. It seems that the only restriction on units that you can't use it on are non-walker vehicles, so basically tanks. Seems fair game on anything else though, including big Titanic units. I guess things like Knights will be walkers, so they'll get to use it. At charging at 6 inches, it still looks like you'd have the chance of failing if you rolled a very low number, so that could be a very painful waste of 2 CP there. It also seems that you don't get the benefit of charging as well, so it would still be your opponent striking first, and I presume they'd probably be able to attack either units that they were engaged with. I don't think that their attacks are just going to be limited to the one that they charged. Still though, in spite of that, this is absolutely hugely powerful. It means that scary melee units can potentially defend nearby other units from charges, just keep them close, and if the opponent dares to charge, they'll have to get mauled by whatever your scary elites are. Might make a lot of nearby units unchargeable basically, unless your opponent has enough raw threats to kill the main thing. Even if things are a bit more balanced, if the opponent just charges against one of your units that are kind of evenly matched against, you might just be able to mob them with too many targets that they can handle. It means that after they attack you should have some things to strike them back and hopefully kill them in your turn. You could also put more bodies on objectives to gain movement with this. Moving 6 inches and then presumably getting to pile in afterwards would be good. Overall, I feel like in the times that this is going to be most effective, it could be truly game changing. 2 CP really is quite expensive, and I guess you would have to budget for this if you did want this kind of defense, but still probably worth it on the times when it does come up. I guess due to that it could be particularly nice on any units that get free stratagems like we saw with the Space Marine Captain and their Terminators. I feel like if that rule's cropping up on the Space Marine Captain, it'll probably be on the generic leader datasheets for quite a few armies. Overall looks cool. I guess this is another one of the examples of reactive mechanics that Games Workshop want to build into 40k to make your units able to do more things in the enemy turn. I think it is a good one along with Overwatch to have on this generic list though, just so everyone does get familiar with it. It could be a bit of a gotcha moment if only say 1 or 2 factions had it. Finally, we've got 2 more that we don't have full text for yet at least. I'll certainly aim to cover them if we do get more leaks at some point. Seems pretty likely if we're already getting stuff this far out. First up, just from the free text, we've got one called Epic Challenge. No real further details on this other than it's something to do with characters in Melee. Just from the name of it, it sounds very likely to be something to allow leaders of squads to duel each other, maybe similar to previous versions of the game. The challenge mechanic I believe was something from 6th and 7th edition, where you could basically have close combat showdowns between the HQs and squad leaders and things, a little bit of cinematics in the middle of a melee. I feel that when this existed, it did often result in some kind of unsatisfying fights. Often just some superpowered character would absolutely annihilate another enemy one before they even get a chance to fight, so it didn't often feel like much of a duel. I guess being tied to CP makes it a bit less easy to spam and maybe a touch less obnoxious. I guess if it is though, it's probably going to give some sort of big advantage to the person who's issuing the challenge. Maybe the opposing character will be forced into combat unless they too spend CP or something. Otherwise we've got one called Tank Shock. Again, no full leak on this one yet, but apparently it's some sort of impact hits type mechanic for vehicles charging the enemy. My guess for this one is that it might well be one that just locks to non-walker vehicles, and that might keep the stratagem access kind of fair, seeing as they're completely locked out of heroic intervention, so I suppose this would be the special thing for the tanks. So far on the tank profiles that we've had previewed, it looks like a lot of them can roadkill a few light infantry. Even the mighty Baneblade though only gets 6 attacks hitting on 4s at AP 0 damage 1, so I guess this would be a way for tanks and vehicles to actually do a bit of meaningful damage in combat. I guess it might potentially scale on the amount of attacks that the vehicle can make, or whether it's a Titanic vehicle versus a non-Titanic vehicle. Either way though, I suspect it'll probably be a way for some tanks to reliably do some damage to some medium or heavy infantry by running them over as they charge them down. I guess it would have to be some fairly meaningful damage output if you're going to spend a CP on it, so I guess we'll wait and see for that. Finally, from their absence on the leaks list, it sounds like these 3 might be gone: Desperate Breakout, Cut Them Down, and Emergency Disembarkation. Though from rules teasers that we've had already, I wouldn't be too surprised if these just might be baked into the core rules now, at least for Desperate Breakout and the Emergency Disembarkation ones. Desperate Breakout was the one for 2 CP to fall back even if you were surrounded. It was kind of Games Workshop's way of making wrap and trap mechanics just a little bit less useful. Though apparently in 10th edition it sounds like it's going to be a bit harder to do, judging by the way that the fight phase and piling in and consolidating works. My guess now though is that Desperate Breakout is probably just going to be something that any unit can elect to do normally. If they happen to find themselves surrounded, they get to fall back over enemy units, and then as per those Battle Shock rules, you roll a dice per each model in the unit, and on a 1 or 2 that model is slain. Quite a high price to pay. That is basically confirmed to be the way that it works if you're trying to fall back with a Battle Shocked unit, so I wouldn't be too surprised if they use the same Desperate Escape type rules to represent units that are trying to get away if surrounded. I feel like that would be quite a good way to implement it, as you're making it highly likely that you'd pay for the privilege with some model deaths. Cut Them Down is one that I suspect that most people won't even notice is gone. That was the one where you had the chance to deal some mortal wounds for your units in engagement range on retreating enemies, but only on a 6+. To be fair, occasionally it could be useful, say if the enemy was trying to fall back with a vehicle on 1 wound, you just needed that 1 wound to deal the damage to it. In practice though, it was very rarely used indeed, and even on the rare chance that you remember it when it's going to be meaningful, you've got a good chance of it failing anyway. Finally, we still don't know masses about the new transport rules in 10th, but emergency disembarkation was the rule in 9th, where you could disembark a bit further if your vehicle was surrounded or your unit was struggling to get the models out for one reason or another. It cost 1 CP and you could put your models all the way out to 6 inches, but at the risk that you'd take a few more slain model casualties compared with normal, kinda similar to Desperate Breakouts. Again, I maybe wouldn't be too surprised if they kinda do similar to Desperate Breakout with this, maybe the chance to take more casualties just to trigger this without spending CP. But otherwise I guess we'll have to wait and see how the transport disembarkation rules shake out, and maybe not too surprised to see it removed from the list though. Overall, certainly some fun leaks there. Out of the list that we've got previewed, I feel like maybe the most standout ones might be Fire Overwatch and Heroic Intervention, plus the 3 core ones, Command Point Reroll, Counter Offensive, and Insane Bravery from before. The defensive ones, with the Go to Ground and Smoke, seem okay, but just maybe aren't quite as high yield maybe. And of course we've yet to see a fair chunk of them, things like the Grenades, Tank Shock, and Challenge one. Rapid Ingress does seem very powerful, but I guess only if you really need some melee units delivered and you don't have a better way. Let me know your thoughts in any case. If we get more leaks like this, I'll certainly cover them here on the channel, so feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more from 10th. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and if you are enjoying the videos regularly, then any support on that is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.